Hey, welcome back everyone to the Progressive Brothers Podcast. This is episode 98. I'm here with my co-host, Renaissance Man.
Hey, welcome back everyone. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and peace to everybody in the chat.
Also, make sure you follow us on Twitter at brothers_podcast. So, President Biden has made a promise on the campaign trail that he would seek out a candidate for, Supreme Court justice, and that would be a black woman. He has 3 candidates lined up, all black women, and fairly young. So let me go over the names real quick. Ketanji Jackson, she's out of DC. She is a appeals judge, and then you have Michelle Childs, who's James Clyburn's pick out of South Carolina. And then you have Kruger, who's out of California, who's the youngest. She's 45 years old, a very liberal woman. And the idea here is that Biden will add some form of liberal woman, black woman, to the Supreme Court as a nominee in his tenure. What's your take on his candidate picks?
Well, first, I think before I go there, I think it's a big win that the fact that Breyer decided to retire, because there was pressure, and I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I could be making this up, but I thought someone like AOC even last year sometime was a little bit more public in her pressure, or maybe another prominent progressive, that basically he needed to retire because you don't want another Ruth Bader Ginsburg situation that could occur. And right now Dems have a 50-50 Senate where they could get someone passed. So I think, first of all, I'm just happy to see that he followed that advice and is retiring, and not jeopardizing Republicans possibly getting to put another Supreme Court justice on the Supreme Court. So I just wanted to highlight that first. As far as the actual candidates, though, I think they're all qualified. I'm more familiar with the first one, Jackson, and Childs, the one out of South Carolina, Michelle Childs, than I am with the third name. I know Kruger. Yeah. I know Childs and Jackson. I believe they were just recent. I believe Childs, he was just recently appointed to the. It was either the federal court in South Carolina, or it may have been the Supreme Court in South Carolina. Federal, okay. She was recently, like last year, and Jackson was actually pretty recent last year as well. If I had to guess right now, I'm thinking Jackson will be the front runner, only because I don't know for Childs, but I know Jackson, when she was confirmed to the federal bench last year, they actually had some crossover with Republicans. So my understanding is Lindsey Graham, I believe it's Susan Collins, Murkowski, and I can't remember the fourth one, actually crossed over and voted with Dems to confirm her. So, and Manchin and Sinema as well voted to confirm her. So from that standpoint, I think that gives them the most leverage in the sense of any chance of someone trying to torpedo this pick or anything like that. I think with that record, I think that really becomes problematic when you voted for this person to go on the federal court. So those are my initial thoughts. I do know that I saw a poll recently on PNC News that roughly about 28% of non-white citizens want Biden to keep his campaign promise of appointing a black woman, and the rest want him to open the pool up. And I believe that number, if you look at it, Democrats, is more like roughly about 50% of Democrats want him to basically open the pool up and look at everyone. So I think that will kind of be a thing to watch, and whether Biden keeps his campaign promise. It looks like it so far, at least with the names and nominees. But I found that data to be interesting, but kind of not surprising at the same time. That this is where things are. I think it sort of shows a split. Obviously, you expect a split from Republicans, but even a split, I think, between more moderate Dems and more progressive Dems. That split as well too.
Well, yeah. Keep in mind that Judge Jackson was a clerk for Breyer.
Yep.
Early in her tenure, so I think we can see the writing on the wall. At least I can see the writing on the wall that she's in D.C. She came up under Breyer, and now she is where she is because of Breyer. And all the trajectory of this is looking like she is going to be the chosen pick. Now, what happens to the other two, and even you can throw in Stacey Abrams' sister, who's a judge as well. I think after the midterms, you're going to hear more things, more murmurs about other placements as well. That should have some impact in some places. But this one is going to be particular in July because that's when Breyer steps down.
The thing that I thought too was going back to Biden, the campaign promise. To me, this was one thing that I think finally broke Dems' way if they play it right. In the sense, when you look at sort of Biden's wins, they've been things that you can point to people, but they're things that are sort of, what have you done for me lately? And they don't fit that criteria in the sense of, okay, when you go back and look at the COVID bill and the stimulus money that, that was great. That helped some people, but people are thinking, that's a year ago. A lot of people probably forgot about it. I've even seen data that said that, hey, people don't even necessarily attribute it to Democrats. They don't really know. Some attribute it to Trump, and then some don't really even, know who to attribute it to. So when you look at things like that, or the infrastructure bill, for example, that's something that's going to play out over some years that you may not see benefits from for several years. You look at something like Build Back Better, which failed, but they're claiming now maybe smaller pieces of it can be passed, coupled with the COVID pandemic still sort of lingering on. Dems didn't have necessarily. I think the economy was really going to be the only message that they can run on. But I think with this, if they're able to get this nominee through, at least for the midterms, to me, this is a tangible thing that you can point to specifically black voters, in my opinion. And I think when you point to a race like Georgia and really hit on the fact to people that, hey, this is the importance of winning a runoff in Georgia. We can't put this black woman on the Supreme Court without winning that race. Or, hey, this is something that I can show that if given the right circumstances and the right political power, that I can put someone who's going to affect policy for the next probably 30 years. I can put them in a position of power. So to me, it's something that's sort of a lasting thing that you can go back to, not necessarily point to just this time, but over time as more and more rulings come. Now, granted, they may not come in your favor unless you're talking about packing the court. But I think the fact that you can show that type of change and influence, to me, is something long-standing and tangible. You can point to people and that you can actually galvanize the base around.
Yeah, it's very important about Georgia because Georgia is going to be a key indicator as to what happens going forward. But this is going to be the precursor as to what's going to happen in Georgia, I think, personally, this pick of the Supreme Court. So you have people on the other side, like Ted Cruz, who says that, Biden making this pick is wrong because it says to white people, you don't matter. White men, you don't matter. White women, you don't matter. That a black woman is more important than everyone else. And they only make up 6% of the population. I find this to be interesting as this is the same guy who left this state during the height of a natural disaster, and the very same president he served under insulted his wife, and he did nothing about it.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing from Cruz and other people on the far right is more pandering to white grievance. Hey, essentially, this is what the future is going to look like. Is when a prominent position comes open, they're going to play identity politics and only put someone black there and exclude people who are white. That's the game he's playing. I think what's missed in all this is, when you look at the different intersections of representation, that's on the Supreme Court. Black women do have a legitimate point in saying, hey, obviously we have someone, who's black, but obviously does not make the best rulings. And I think a lot of people would have a lot of issues of saying that, represents us on the court in Clarence Thomas. But when you break it down to that next level of the intersection as well, too, I think they do have a legitimate point in that, hey, their viewpoint should be represented in the sense of, you have other major nationalities who are represented. I'm sorry, not national, other races who are represented on the Supreme Court. White women, Hispanic women, Jewish women as well too. So, or at least previously were. So, I think that's a legitimate. Concern that they raise. And the thing that I always found interesting is, when you look at, I don't know about Michelle Childs, but you look at Jackson's credentials. She, like you said, she clerked for Breyer, double Harvard graduate, undergrad and from law school. And, all of a sudden I hear people start talking about credentials. When someone like Barrett is put on the court who didn't even go to the Ivy League, there's no murmurs about credentials. Or, when Trump said he's going to appoint a woman, people didn't, Republicans didn't go and blast him for saying, hey, he's appointing a woman playing identity politics. Or, you can go and look at when George Bush, I believe it ultimately was the Roberts pick, but he was going to nominate his press secretary, right, who was a lawyer. and the Republicans had to stop him from doing that. And I didn't even know this until recently, but if you go back to, I believe, the 1940s, there was actually someone who was appointed to the Supreme Court who I don't even think they graduated college. And I know they didn't go to law school, which technically
the majority of Supreme Court justices who are white men did not go to college. Not graduate either. And so they barely had a high school diploma. And so what's happening here is, to your point, there's all this outrage over credentials, but the majority of your white Supreme Court justices did not have the credentials.
Yeah, that's why I didn't get the whole credentials, because I'm like, what do you, I don't see what credentials. Like I said, Harvard Law School graduate, clerk for a Supreme Court justice, once again, it goes back to the whole thing you hear about affirmative action and how those things are framed. But to me, once you start looking at any profession of people who are in, which I think she would definitely qualify, who are in the top, 5-10% of their profession, this whole idea of being qualified, I think it really goes out the window. And I think it really comes into really talking more about fit at that point. Because when you start looking at people who are that highly ranked in their profession, the question of competence and qualification, they wouldn't be there if they had all those accolades. So to me, it's just kind of, like I said, it's just framing a narrative that people want to push. Because like I said, you technically don't even need a law degree. Obviously, it's evolved to that. With most people who are now nominees do have law degrees. But even when you look at some of the people that Trump tried to put up, not on the Supreme Court, but on the federal bench, you had guys who had never tried a case before that they were trying to nominate. American Bar Association said, these people aren't qualified, and you didn't hear this outcry from people then.
And those are the same people who struck down his, 59 to 60 cases for voter fraud. Those are all the same people. And so, I find it interesting that this whole credential thing comes up, because it's only in reference to black people. Same thing happened to Obama. Well, he was just a community organizer. What does he know about, politics? You can't, so you get it from both sides, not just black women, but from black men too. That, somehow black people don't have a place within the greater politic of America. In that, it's an affirmative action, quote unquote, pick. But in reality, wouldn't you say that all those non-qualified white men were affirmative action picks because they didn't have the credentials either? Most of them didn't even graduate from high school.
I think it's ironic, because we're kind of also going into a little bit, the Supreme Court recently saying they're going to rule on affirmative action, and you hear these arguments being made, and I go back to, please point to the time in American history where people really looked through the applicant pool and found the most quote unquote qualified person, and there were no barriers that stopped people, from entering the applicant pool in the first place, be it, they weren't allowed to attend the institutions necessary or they didn't have the rights. So to me, it's always been, this idea that, hey, meritocracy, it's never really existed in America. And like I said, I think it's overblown in the sense of once you reach a certain, a certain cutoff, a certain level of expertise and of competence, I go back to fit. I think there are other things you have to start looking at because, at a certain point, it's like, okay, if you got two people who went to the Ivy League, clerked for Supreme Court justices, have been on the bench for, maybe one has 6 months or a year more experience. Are you saying, oh, well, because they have that 6 months or a year more experience, they should get the nod and this person's not qualified when, okay, they may have, like I said, a slightly less experience, but they bring a different viewpoint that will diversify the institution that they're representative and take and basically raise the performance of the institution that they'd be going into overall. That's where I think, that type of thinking comes into place. And when that angle can be argued, in my opinion, that's when you start hearing people on the right start trying to talk about credentials.
And so, staying with the Supreme Court, you also have Clarence Thomas, who has a wife who could be potentially indicted for January 6th. Now, that may be a conflict of interest and he may have to step down. If not this summer, depending on how things go with this whole entire J6 committee investigation, at some point in Biden's tenure, there may be some calling to have this guy step down because of what his wife has been involved in. If she gets called in, for investigation or hearing, and so that may open up another opportunity as well if he has to step down. I mean, he's of age, so he could potentially have to step down. I'm kind of 50-50 on this, but I'm thinking that another opportunity may come out of this, that he could be the next shoe to drop, for Biden to shove somebody else in there as well.
Yeah, I think it would. It'll be interesting to see. I think it would be I think there would be some sort of ethics violation that they'd have to get him on, in the sense of either he was involved in this or the fact that his wife is so tied up to it, just that it becomes problematic for him to rule. And I would argue not just necessarily January 6th, but my understanding is that she's always been tied with these far right groups and organizing. So, who knows, as the rabbit hole gets deeper with January 6th, who knows what bodies turn up and who has ties to who. So, I think you make a legitimate point there.
Yeah, because Kavanaugh was a Trump pick. Amy Coney Barrett, the Trump pick. Trump got two prominent nominees in record-breaking time during his tenure, and he only served one term. What's to say that the same couldn't come true for Biden?
Yeah. Technically, got three. I believe it's Gorsuch was his other pick. Yep. The other thing I think when you talk about someone like Thomas or another appointee, the one thing I did take away from this with Breyer retiring at this juncture was Dems also may have some concern about the Senate going forward in 2022. In the sense, because I looked at it in the sense of, if you look at places where, you got people like Rob Portman retiring in Ohio, I think Ron Johnson's going to have a pretty competitive race trying to win re-election in Wisconsin. I can't remember the guy's name in Pennsylvania, who's a Republican, but, he's got some bad baggage. I think some domestic violence abuse accusations, as well as some other things. So, and then obviously you've got the Georgia Senate race where you've got someone like Herschel Walker who's trying to run for Senate against Warnock. So for me, I sort of thought, Dems, The House seemed to be something that a lot of Dems sort of wrote off, but the Senate actually was somewhere that some Dems thought they could hold on to, and some were even optimistic to think that they could actually gain a seat or two, which, if that happens, to me, opens up the possibility of a even more liberal type of candidate that you could appoint to the Supreme Court. Because I don't think any of the nominees that Biden has appointed would be them. I think they'd obviously be, they would side with the left, but I don't think that they would be the most liberal justice necessarily. Not all the time. I think there would be some issues, just because of, being a black woman. I think they're obviously going to be progressive on some other issues, but, her viewpoints may not necessarily be the most liberal all the time versus, if this is something that's done when you say have maybe like a 52-48, can you get that more liberal person on the court? Which to me, the fact that Breyer has now retired at this juncture kind of says to me that maybe Dems are a little bit concerned about the Senate as well and holding on to that. So, let's strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to understand that the Supreme Court is a overarching conservative institution, or platform for that matter. And so it always weighs to the conservatives because it's their last bastion of hope, and the last bastion of power, outside of NASCAR and hockey. And so I think that people try to politicize the court, but the reality is it's typically a conservative stronghold. It's where they can actually get things done without challenge. And putting, Ketanji Jackson in there, or any one of those choices in there, adds a mean speed bump, for that matter, to the process that conservatives are trying to hold on to. And people have to understand that she is going to rule based on, what the case is. And so to think that, she's going to pass some ultra liberal agenda in there. No, that's not how the Supreme Court works. It's a lot more structured than that. And if you look at most judges, whether it's Supreme Court, federal or municipal, or otherwise, they tend to be pretty rigid in their views, so to speak. So that idea of conservatism is different than cultural conservatism. They rule by the book and not by the culture.
Yeah, the other thing I think when you talk about politicizing the court, ironically, Supreme Court nominees used to not be this contentious. If you go back and look at the confirmation of someone like RBG when she was nominated, I believe her nomination process, I believe, Clarence Thomas was obviously controversial, but for other things outside of the actual nomination. But when you look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg, her pick to the court was almost unanimous. I want to say it was either 90-10 or 98-2, something. It was in the 90s. So like you said, with Republicans, this sort of being the last bastion, that's what you're sort of seeing, and that's what the big push, and that's what I tried to emphasize to people who think, you hear people say, voting doesn't matter, or they're not going to vote for the president, they're only going to vote in down ballot. And I'm saying, when you look at the nomination process, not only for the Supreme Court, but just for federal judges in general, that's presidential power, and obviously goes through the Senate. And that's why you've seen this big push when Trump was president with Mitch McConnell. I believe they appointed roughly a third of the federal bench that's now sitting under Trump. And that's because, like you said, that's the last bastion of hope when you start looking at where demographics are going and where Republican voters are losing power. Places like Texas, how they're trending more towards blue when you look at the demographics. Same thing in places like Georgia, possibly North Carolina as well too. That's, people are starting to see, obviously, hey, winning presidential races is going to be more difficult. Thus, and with that, I think winning offices like Senate and House seats is going to be more difficult. So legislative power is going to be a lot more difficult to hold on to. So, like you said, the bastion is, hey, and the same thing with presidency goes. So you go to the third wing of the government, and that's the courts, where you can, like you said, appoint young judges who will be there for 30 years, and can essentially, do what conservatives always say, claim they hate, which is legislate from the bench. Get some progressive legislation that gets passed. Granted, it's a lot more difficult to strike down legislation that's being passed through the Congress, but it's still obviously possible with, you saw the big push to repeal Obamacare. But that's the game conservatives are playing. And especially when you start talking about things like executive orders, those become even easier to strike down in the courts, as you saw with, like, for example, Biden's vaccine mandate. Mm-hmm. So that's the game they're playing.
Like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you follow us on Twitter @brothers_podcast.